Hello, welcome. My name is Katie. This is Sully. He's going to be joining us today. Today we're going to be looking at the highest rated books that I have read. So I use Storygraph to track my reading, but Storygraph doesn't allow you to sort by ratings. So I exported my Storygraph into Goodreads, and that's what we're using in order to do this. We're going to do the top 20 highest rated books that I have read. We're gonna go in order from the least highest rated to most highest rated, so the last one is gonna be number 1 most highest rated book that I have read. So, to start us off, we have Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolyn Criado Perez. This is one of my favorite books that I have ever read. I absolutely loved the audiobook for this. This is basically talking about the gender data bias that exists and how we use data to make a lot of decisions in our world, but how that data doesn't work if we're not gathering data from all members of the population. It specifically focuses on the way that we're not gathering the right data from women and how that leads to further structural discrimination against women. So one of the most compelling examples was talking about the medical clinical trial system. Generally, the number one biggest side effect for women for medications is that they simply do not work for women. And the author kind of brings up one reason why this might be the case, which is that early clinical trials do not include women. And so when we're doing clinical trials on animals, we're only using male animals. And so we might be missing so many of these medications that would work just for females that don't work for men, but we catch all of the drugs that just work for men and not for women, if that makes sense. Highly recommend this, definitely understand why it's so highly rated. The next 3 are also all nonfiction, which is really interesting. A lot of the highest rated books that are on this list are nonfiction, which I guess makes sense. I tend to rate nonfiction, if I do rate it, much higher than I do fiction, just because I'm learning something, so I am getting value out of it from the start. Let me know in the comments what you think about that, if your highest rated books are also nonfiction. I know a lot of people primarily read fiction, but I am curious. Okay, then this is one of my favorite books of all time. We have Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures. This is one of my favorite books I've ever read. I love mushrooms. I'll read anything about mushrooms with mushrooms on the cover. Please give it to me. Every time I learn something about mushrooms, it completely blows my mind how cool they are. If you've ever heard anything about like slime molds or have heard in like horror, like this book is inspired by Ophidiocordyceps, which is a fungus that exists in our world, and what would happen if that fungus was able to infect humans in a cannibalistic zombie way. This is one of my favorite horror books of all time, and it's based off of an actual mushroom that infects ants, and Entangled Life told us all about that horrifying fungus and talked about the girl with all the gifts and kind of how this used that example. It also talks about hallucinogenic mushrooms and how we think those evolved and what the evolutionary advantage of having psilocybin is. It's just really, really interesting. I learned a ton. The audiobook is narrated by the author, and it was an amazing experience. Would highly recommend. Then we have Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower by Brittany Cooper. This audiobook is top notch. It's narrated by the author, and it really feels like she is sitting down with you and just discussing things with you, explaining things to you, talking about her life experience. This is one of my favorite titles I have ever heard. The idea of Eloquent Rage is incredible, and it's really about the author using eloquent rage in order to change people's minds, go about her life where she is using her intelligence and her knowledge to get her point across and still not shying away from the anger that she feels. Next, we have Theanthropy Scene Reviewed by John Green. I love this book. I think it definitely deserves a place on this list. This book sparked a lot of different internal thoughts and conversations that I've had with myself. This is basically John Green going through and giving star ratings to different things that humans have created, from Dr. Pepper to wintry mix to viral meningitis. It talks about the beginning of the pandemic, and I really think that nonfiction is where John Green thrives. As a child, I loved his young adult books, and as an adult, I'm really enjoying his nonfiction. I hope he does more of it. Okay, our first fiction book on this list is going to be The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. yes, 100%. This definitely deserves a place on this list. I love this book so much. It's written entirely in prose. This is the story of a boy who grows up in London. He's going to school. He is gay and he is trying to figure out where he fits in life, and it's a coming of age story. When he gets to college, he finds his way into drag, and his drag persona is the Black Flamingo. This is a beautiful book. It made me cry. I have a reading vlog where I read this. I'll link that up there. I absolutely love this book and I would highly encourage you to check it out. And there are also little interjections of standalone poems throughout this book that really hit home. I think it was the last one, completely made me cry. I think this is just a really beautiful book. Then we have The Martian by Andy Weir. I did really enjoy this. I love Andy Weir's writing style. This is not my favorite of the two Andy Weirs that I have read. I liked Project Hail Mary more, but I did still really enjoy this. Andy Weir has this unique talent for taking situations that should be extremely boring. A man is alone on a planet and he's trying to grow food and you're literally watching potatoes grow. Somehow it captured my attention and kept it throughout the whole book. There were high stakes. His main character is always a little funny and crude, and I just really love the tone of these books. Okay, next we have Where the Crawdads Sing. I actually just watched the movie for this and it was a little disappointing. I really loved this book. I now live in North Carolina. This is set in the North Carolina marsh. I don't usually love coming of age stories, but this one really hit home for me. I love the fact that there was this mystery cutting through the whole book, because at the beginning we find out that someone has been killed and we are basically trying to figure out what's happened to him throughout this whole book. But we are also following our main character Kaya as she grows up, and a lot of really awful things happen to her, and it's basically her in the marsh. If you were a kid who played in dirt, this book is for you. This book made me cry. I really loved it. I was a little disappointed in the movie. There were certain scenes that I desperately wanted to see on screen that they just didn't include, and it was a little disappointing to me, but overall, still enjoyed the movie. Really love the book. Okay, then we have A Game of Thrones, which is a situation where I did enjoy the series better than the books. I think I will continue with the books. I read this mostly on audiobook while I was on a long road trip, and it was perfect for that. It was still high stakes, high adventure. It'd been a while since I'd watched the TV show when I picked this up, and so it was good to kind of get reacquainted to the characters that I knew and loved. This really closely follows the series. This is basically the first season of Game of Thrones, and I did really enjoy it. I think I will continue with the rest of the books, like I said, but it's not something that's really calling to me right now. So I do understand why this is on this list. It has a 4.44 average rating. Obviously the TV series is incredibly popular, and so people have not just the book experience, but also likely the series also influencing their rating. I do think the book is good. I didn't love some of the representation in here, but I understand why it's on this list. Then we have The House in the Cerulean Sea, which I have currently lent out to one of my friends because I love it so much. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It is a warm hug, and I understand why it's on this list, and I get it. We're following our main character, Linus, and he is a social worker at the Department for Magical Children, and he basically goes to this orphanage in order to make sure that the children are safe and that the world is safe from the children, because they are magical children. Gets to know these children and their caretakers, and this is just the most pure, comforting story about parenting and helping kids grow up, and it's just really wholesome and adorable, and I loved it. This is the book that I recommend if you're going through it. This is the comforting book that you need. I bought this the day that the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade because I needed something comforting, and it really did what I wanted it to do. This is Bargain Bin Rom-Com. It has a 4.47 average rating. It only has 264 ratings. I want to see it keep that really high star rating and have lots and lots more ratings, because this is Lena Norm's first poetry collection. She's one of my favorite YouTubers. She makes lots of content about books and the climate crisis and sustainable living, and I just really, really love her videos. This poetry collection was amazing. I did read this in a vlog, so if you want to hear my full thoughts on it, I'll link that up there. But I'm very happy to see it so highly rated. Again, it makes sense that this is so highly rated because this just came out last month, and I think a lot of people who've picked this up at this point know Lena or know her content or are familiar with her style, and so they know what they're getting into. So I hope this continues to find its audience. Then we have Educated by Tara Westover, and that has a 4.47 average rating. I have to be honest, I didn't love Educated. I wish I had respected it from afar. There is a lot of physical abuse in this that I found very, very difficult to read. So if that's something that is not good for you to read, I would skip this one. This is about Tara growing up in a very like fundamentalist, strict Mormon family. She's not allowed to go to school. It's basically her journey of trying to escape from this really bad situation and also educate herself in the different ways that she's able to educate herself. It's a very interesting story. I just wish I would have respected it from afar. Okay, then we have A Man and His Cat, which has a 4.48 average rating and is possibly the most sunshine in a book that I could ever recommend. This is a beautiful manga about a man who adopts a cat, and he's basically adopting this cat to help him through this grief that he's experiencing. The kitty he adopts is the cat in the pet store that no one else has adopted. He's been there for a really long time, and it's just a super cute story of this man who knows nothing about how to take care of a cat, adopting a cat and figuring out how to take care of one. If you have ever owned a cat, I would highly recommend. I think this will put the biggest smile on your face. Then we have Sister Outsider, Essays and Speeches by Audre Lorde. This is a great compilation of Audre Lorde's speeches and essays, and I would highly recommend. I read this for a class on feminism, and I really, really enjoyed it. This would be a great book club book if you want to sit down and talk about feminism, or a great book for you just to read and learn on your own. Would highly recommend. They are separate essays and speeches, so it's a good book that if nonfiction is something that you don't usually read, I would say that a speech and essay collection is probably a good place to start, because you can read one, think about it, reflect on it, and then when you're ready for more nonfiction, you can go ahead and read another one. You can kind of flip through and figure out which is going to be the best one for you at that moment. Really love this collection. Project Hail Mary is also a 4.52 average rating, and I really loved this book. This is probably my favorite sci-fi that I have read ever. I loved this book. I also love The Martian, but like I said, this is my favorite of Andy Weir's. The other character in here has my whole entire heart, and I just loved everything about this book. Again, it seems like it would be so boring, and it's a guy who wakes up on a spaceship. He can't remember why he's there. He knows he has some mission. Doesn't know why he's there. Has absolutely no clue what he's supposed to be doing, and he's just trying to figure out how to survive and complete his mission. Somehow, Andy Weir crafts this into an incredibly enthralling book. I loved every single page of this. This is an incredible graphic novel. This is my favorite graphic novel that I have ever read, and it deserves a spot on this list 100%. This series lives up to the hype. If you haven't read it yet, I really encourage you to pick it up. This is about two boys who meet at school and fall in love, and I loved it. Sully is back just in time for the top 5. So the 5th highest book that I have read is Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty. This book is so well researched and is an incredible, comprehensive look at everything that happened with the opioid crisis and the Sackler family's role in that crisis. I think it was an incredible work of journalism, and I really enjoyed it. I also really enjoyed the series Dopesick that touches on a lot of the same concepts. I think this is something that is good to be educated on, and yeah, if you're interested in learning more about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis, I think this is a good one to pick up. Next, we have Braiding Sweetgrass. This is one of my favorite nonfictions by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it has a 4.57 average rating. I really loved this book. Robin Wall Kimmerer does this great job of taking her botanist knowledge and her indigenous knowledge and combining them and telling incredible stories with that knowledge. I nearly cried multiple times reading this book. It is an incredible story of her life and also all of this knowledge that she has that she wants to share. I absolutely loved this. I would encourage you to read it. I did read the audiobook for this one, and I really loved it. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, which has a 4.7 average rating. And yes, 100% deserves that rating. Everyone has been reading this right now, and I understand why. Jeanette is talking about her relationship with her mother and her relationship with acting and fame, and how through therapy she realized that her relationship with her mother was incredibly abusive and not good for her. And I really loved just the overall tone of this, and how instead of writing this book as an adult looking back on what happened, she stayed in the voice of how she was feeling when the events were occurring, and it just made it so much more real. And I'm just really glad that she was able to write this book and share her story. If you're comfortable with the subject matter, I think you should definitely pick this up. Then we have my favorite memoir I have ever read, which is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the story of Chanel Miller's sexual assault and subsequent trial, which was very, very public, and she went through that situation under a pseudonym. And this is basically her memoir saying, no, you should know my name. I would read anything that Chanel Miller writes. I think she's an incredibly talented writer. She kind of talks about how she would have written a book about her life regardless of what happened to her. If she had done X, she would have written a book about that. If she had done Y, she would have written a book about that. Instead, she's having to write a book about her sexual assault because that's what the world knows her for. This was an incredibly hard book to read. I cried multiple times. It took me a really long time to get through this. I think it's incredibly important to read if you can. If you need to respect this from afar, definitely do that. I just really applaud Chanel Miller for telling her story. And the number one highest rated book that I have read is How the Word Is Passed: A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. Another great book. I think it should be required reading in schools. Our author is traveling to different parts of the country and the world that have a connection with slavery, and kind of taking us on that journey with him and talking about why we don't learn about these things in school and what the narrative is that we have been told instead and how we have been lied to, and reckoning with our history of slavery. I think it should be required reading, like so many of the things on this list. I feel like this could be taught in schools. How the Word Is Passed should definitely be taught in schools. Braiding Sweetgrass could be taught in schools. Empire of Pain could be taught in schools. Sister Outsider, The Theanthropy Scene Reviewed, Eloquent Rage, Entangled Life, Invisible Women, all of these things, all of the nonfiction on this list I think should be taught in schools. It's all incredible. Those are the top 20 books that I have read according to Goodreads. And yeah, there's nothing on this list that I don't think should be on there. I really enjoyed all of these things. Next, I will be talking about the lowest rated books that I have read. So if you want to stick around for that, please make sure you subscribe. I will see you very, very soon. Until then, bye.